Are heads scary? That's the question.
Yes. Yes.
Really?
I mean, what do they want? This time, friends, this time I tell you we watched Season 8, Episode 5, The Thing That Couldn't Die.
In which there's a dick in a box, but not in the SNL way.
But before we have to start talking about that episode and that movie, let's talk about something pleasant, a little bit of follow-up. We got to see the Mads talk about a great movie, or talk over a great movie, I should say.
Although they did do some talking about it.
They did at the end, it's true. Yeah, they did Glenn or Glenda.
Yeah.
They live streamed this show that they've been, doing, they've done it a couple dozen times on tour. Now, all of us get to see it. Even those of us in Forsaken Canada got a chance to watch it.
And it was worth the wait.
It was so good.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Honestly, the best riff for me anyway was the one that'll most likely be bleeped out of this show, which is when we cut to Bella for the first time sitting in his scary living room. He turns to the camera and Trace piped in with, "The f*** you want?"
It was so good. It was really nice to see them go blue, to go, to use the dirty words, to make some incredibly rude jokes, or incredibly sexed up jokes anyways. And yet, importantly, it was pretty respectful, let's say, about the main issues in the movie. I know that a lot of people who were thinking about watching it were getting a little concerned because it's a movie about Ed Wood. It's a movie about his desire to dress in women's clothing, and it deals with issues of transvestitism and transsexuality. And, those can be some comedic danger zones to wander into, as people who've been paying attention to the discourse around Mystery Science Theater 3000 in the last few months will know. But it's Frank and Trace. It's not Mike. So we're okay. They did a pretty good job of it.
Yeah. I was happy to report that it's like, there's, if for anyone who is worried about cringing, fear not. It is a great riff of a great film. I mean, you could have the best time of your life watching Glenn or Glenda, because frankly, it's a life-affirming movie.
It's a legitimately great movie.
Mm-hmm. Like, I will hear no words against it.
Exactly. And indeed, I really enjoyed how in the after show, there were a lot of questions from the audience to Trace and Frank. And most of them were like, Ed Wood, why does he suck so much? And they were like, he sure doesn't. Ed Wood was really interesting and great. This is a really weird film and has a lot of problems to it in many ways, but it's also really fantastic and does so much with what it's got. And it's just, every scene is memorable and striking. You just walk away dizzy, perhaps, but also delighted.
Yes, and in fact, two very important points I think were made. One from Frank, where he had mentioned how, he's seen Glenn or Glenda a million times. He'd gladly watch it a million more. And it's because there is such a love and a certain impressiveness from Ed Wood in like making the movie and making such a personal and bizarre and interesting film that script problems aside, especially in regards to the psychology of the film, that it's quite a wonderful movie to come back to. By contrast, so many people insist on watching The Room, which is funny but overrated, in my opinion, as a bad movie connoisseur. And he says, like, that's a laughable movie, sure, but I never want to see it again.
Yeah, because it's so unpleasant and sexist and awful in its point of view.
Yeah, it reflects who Tommy Wiseau is in the same way that Glenn or Glenda reflects who Ed Wood is. But you go away going, oh, Ed Wood was this like wonderful, interesting, quirky guy, a man with boundless imagination, whereas Tommy Wiseau is a bitter old crank slighted against the world with a particular hatred for women that is seen throughout the film.
Exactly. It's sort of also just like how we just looked at 3 movies by Coleman Francis Coleman, and you similarly walk away with a sense of what his worldview was like, and I'll leave it up to you to decide if you want to spend much time there.
Mm-hmm. And then it was Trace who later went on to say that Ed Wood considering the limitations that he had, where he had absolutely no money and he had to incorporate this stock footage somehow to tell his story, like, you can laugh at the inept directorial choices, and they are pretty funny, such as where Trace and Frank point out that there's just a shot of a radiator for no reason.
Yes.
Dialogue is going
so good.
on. But despite things like that, it's like, Edward was extremely creative in using that stock footage and telling a story, and it reflects the kind of imagination and kind of electricity he had, as well as intelligence that he had as a filmmaker. Like, he really had a lot of ideas and was, again, this interesting creative guy. So I'm glad that not just the riffing experience itself felt celebratory, but they really hammered home on that with the Q&A segment.
Yeah. And they're not done.
No. More importantly, we're getting another movie that is a delight to watch that has been also wrongly labeled as a bad movie. It is William Castle's The Tingler.
Which I have not seen, but I've heard so many fun things about.
Oh my God. See, there's this little insect that grows in your spine, and if you get scared, it enlarges, and the only way to make it shrink down again is if you scream real loud.
Now, this is a movie that's sort of well known in particular because there was some sort of gimmick in the audience seating, right? Like that there was some sort of, you'd get electrically shocked or something when the Tingler was tingling on screen.
I do believe this is the one where you get a shock, but so certain theaters were rigged up as the movie was traveling from place to place. But more importantly, there's a moment in which the movie essentially breaks down, like it's Gremlins 2, the new batch, and Vincent Price wanders into a movie theater, and the entire film goes dark, and it's like, please, if you're terribly afraid, you must scream real loud right now in order to eliminate the Tingler from this theater.
Did this come out after Peter Pan? Yeah, it did. It came out. Peter Pan is from 1953. The Tingler is from 1959. So making the audience do things to affect the plot is a big thing in the 50s.
And it would certainly explain why there's that ticking clock alligator in the Tingler.
And why Vincent Price is dressed up like Tinkerbell.
But yes, that is a delight. I'm really looking forward to that because, again, if nothing else, you've got a great movie. But I think you're guaranteed some pretty quality riffs, given that you have two of our favorites, some old hands, some veterans in the wars of riffing, with one, Trace Beaulieu, and TV's Frank Conniff.
And they had the chemistry. It was just great.
It's never gone away.
Nothing's changed. It's so good. It's so good. So yeah, that'll be on August 18th. We'll have a link for tickets in the show notes. Again, some of the money that they raise will be going to a good cause. And also, if you don't manage to be able to watch the show when it's happening, you can still download it later. So don't you worry if time is an issue with you.
And I've got to give them a lot of kudos too as performers that, it'd be very easy to kind of like phone it in or lose one's energy over a Zoom call as opposed to like, the jazz and electricity in the room of a live crowd. But Trace and Frank were in great form.
Yeah, absolutely.
Plus, we got to check out Trace's living room, which is super cool. Just full of monster memorabilia and stuff. I wanted to live there. Can I just, Trace, if you're listening, can I move into your home? I'll be good.
I'm sure he's got plenty of room for you.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you want to move to Minnesota right now.
Sure. Why not? I've heard nothing but good things in the news.
Also, apparently, when they've done this show live on tour in the past, they also showed a bunch of shorts beforehand because Glen is a very short film. They didn't do it this time because they sort of wanted to keep it tight, let's say. And so I suggested it to the person who's helping them put it all together that maybe they should do an Oops All Shorts edition sometime soon. And I was told that, in fact, the 70-minute long reel of shorts for them to riff over already exists. So who knows? Maybe that will be happening someday.
Oh, fingers crossed. If there's one thing we've been aching for after, the total lack of shorts, not just in the episode we're watching today, but in seasons 11 and 12, is that we could use a lot of shorts. Come on. There's no reason not to.
So that's happening. So that's going to be great. So you should definitely get your tickets. You should definitely participate. It is very exciting.
Ooh, and we should also mention a big congratulations to our contest winners.
Yes, congratulations to Justin and Parker for winning the 2 tickets we had. I hope you enjoyed the show as well. And I want to thank everybody who entered for filling our inbox with lots and lots of pictures of Donald Pleasance. Ooh, it made us happy.
Yes, I am currently diving into our collection of Donald Pleasance pictures like Scrooge McDuck jumping into his money bank.
So good. All right. Well, Maybe when a bunch of the Mads doing things are over, we will do some sort of special bonus episode where we talk about all of them. But until then, we have to drag ourselves back to the good old days of season 8 and talk about a thing that couldn't die.
Are you sure you don't want to talk about Glenn or Glenda some more? It's a good movie.
I know, but duty calls.
Oh, man. Duty schmoody. This time we watch Season 8, Episode 5, The Thing That Couldn't Die, a Universal picture. The plot concerns a somewhat gifted girl named Jessica, who is just a whiz with a divining rod. Turns out that divining rod can be used for evil, because it's also used to find the severed head of a guy, an evil guy. See, this evil guy was decapitated on orders of Sir Francis Drake or something. I don't know, man. So what's the deal with this crazy head anyway? Well, it turns out it's still alive for starters. Wow. So it starts muttering to a farmhand, and it forms a psychic bond with him or something. I don't know. See, the head wants to be reunited with his body. That much we do know. And that body is buried somewhere out there in the California desert, where the head was found. So the head possesses several more people, including dear Jessica, and is eventually reunited with its body. Before this charlatan sorcerer can wreak havoc on the world, someone waves a fleur-de-lis at him, and he dies of fright. Like, he literally turns into a bleach-white skeleton in his coffin and everything. Now, is this a metaphor for relationships between Anglophone and Francophone speakers in Quebec? Nah, probably not.
Meanwhile, on the Satellite of Love, we begin with Tom at the opening of his new art show, which is called Crow, 1,000 Years of Tyranny. You might remember that a bunch of time passed, curiously, between seasons 7 and 8. Well, anyway, Tom hates Crow and wanted to let him know. Also, Crow had commissioned the art, and Tom even convinces Crow to pay for more art about how much Tom hates Crow. So that's fun. Then the Satellite of Love gets pulled into the orbit of a new planet. It's filled with observers, guys in robes who carry their brains around in vats. They've got Pearl and Bobo living with them, and Pearl is all bossing them around like usual. That's our Pearl, unaware that the observers plan to kill her and put her in their museum. In segment 2, an observer pops aboard the Satellite of Love to observe Mike and the bots, and insult them. They get him to pop away, and he leaves behind his brain. Whoopsie. In segment 3, the observers cause someone from Mike's memory to show up. It's a guy named Finnegan, who starts to beat Mike up. Weird, Mike doesn't remember this guy at all. Instead, he tries to remember actor Adrian Barbeau. But the observers must have misheard him. They conjure up Emperor Hadrian instead, who starts to beat Mike up. Third time's a charm, and Adrian Barbeau appears, and starts to beat Mike up. In segment 4, Crow has a new documentary to show everybody, Crow T. Robot's Bram Stoker's The Civil War. I guess this is an update to the school essays that Joel used to make the bots write. Of course, Crow's Civil War facts are wrong, and his closing credits are longer. Finally, after a little physical comedy involving Tom's severed head, Pearl is ready for bed. She bosses the observers around for a while, but then really has it in for Bobo, who dares to imagine he'll get to sleep in the same room as Pearl, much less in the same bed. For you see, Pearl hates Bobo, and we spend the last few minutes of the episode celebrating that hatred. The end. This is not a pleasant episode.
No, I think you're left with ultimately just, I don't know. I one of my notes here is just, oh, what a dog shit episode.
My note is, was this episode offensive to straight men?
Oh, what, because of all the hooting and hollering whenever somebody's in bed with somebody else, if they're two ladies?
Yeah, I mean, especially that. But in general, all right, here's the thing. Mm-hmm. This movie passes the Bechdel test. There are, in fact, multiple female characters in it, and they talk to each other about things other than who they're going to hook up with, and that's great. And every time there's a woman on screen, they get some sort of homina type comment from Mike and the bots, and especially whenever the two women who end up sharing a bed together platonically, but, you know, this gets Mike and the bots excited, and they definitely want to imagine this as a lesbian affair, which would be fine, except they're doing this in the most, you know, heterosexual guys sure do like lesbians kind of way. And every sexual desire that they express in this episode is like textbook what dudes are supposed to like. They don't go off the script in terms of things that, at least in the 90s, we all agreed that real men liked. They like pretty ladies that are getting undressed. They like the idea of lesbians performing for them. It's entirely unsympathetic to the other people on screen, but it's also just thin and predictable and sad and desperate, and it's such a stereotype of heterosexual masculinity, but it doesn't feel like they're doing it to like poke fun at that stereotype or anything. It's just there. They're just participating in it.
No, there's no subversion at all. That's kind of what's disappointing, but that's basically where we are. Like, that's my memory of like the sci-fi era in general, is that these sort of frat house humor is just embraced and it's never going to be questioned. So it's just there to be entertaining, and if you find that entertaining, it's like, okay.
Yeah, if you find that entertaining, the 80s have a bunch of films for you.
Oh, you are going to love stand-up in the 80s. Basically, wherever there's a Hawaiian shirt coming up on the stage, you're going to love it.
I don't know. I can only remember Rodney Dangerfield wearing Hawaiian shirts. I don't remember him doing this kind of humor as much.
That's late 90s Rodney Dangerfield.
I suppose.
Oh, man, you got to get him in a suit. But yes, it's disappointing because, again, like MST3K used to be smarter than this. And in fact, that was a note that Trace and Frank talked about when they were talking about their riffing. If anything, they talked about their time on the show going up from seasons 2 to 6 for Frank, and from all the way back in KTMA to the end of season 7 for Trace. They talked about how PC they would be. They would talk about whether or not such and such a joke was appropriate. They would talk about whether or not, this joke really adds anything to the show, or if it's to this or to that, and so that it's not just mean and sort of knocking people down. And while this isn't necessarily a case of punching down, it's more a case of just being unimaginative. Like, there's no kind of like out to it. Like, even a sketch would have perhaps helped if there was something, but that sort of continues on with the theme, with the wishing for Adrian Barbeau and whatnot.
Yeah, I guess I was just thinking about, in the earlier days, all the crushes and whatnot, and sexual attraction that would get expressed, falling for Creepy Girl in Catalina Caper, or falling for Kim Cattrall in Mannequin. Like, these felt specific and weird, and not like everyone was supposed to agree with that. Whereas this is just, oh yeah, you two women, lesbian action, hoo hoo hoo, whoa whoa whoa, yeah.
Yeah, this is the equivalent of being told women be shopping, but instead of that coming from the likes of Sinbad, it's coming from, well, our own kind, so to speak. It's coming from a straight guy to the assumed straight audience, I guess. And it's boring. It's just a boring set of riffs.
So yeah, that was really upsetting. And also, as I may have hinted in my summary of the episode, it's just the character interactions are now basically everybody hates each other.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that reflects where they are in the show? Like, do you think that at this point that Mike and company are just frustrated with having to write for the Countdown Puppet Show for yet another year, and that perhaps the sci-fi renewal was not that big of a boon as they had hoped?
I mean, I'm sure they were frustrated with aspects of their new overlords, but I don't know. They've brought in some new blood, and yet, Bill is playing Crow as if he hates everybody, and yet clearly he should be super excited to be there. I don't know. I don't know if that's it. I don't know if it's, the meanness of late 90s comedy. I don't know. I have no idea.
I don't know, but it's kind of a drag. It's kind of a drag to go through it, and it doesn't help that this is like a draggy movie as well. The whole thing is just kind of a bore. There's not really any big laughs in it, as far as I can recall. And, we get introduced to the observers, I guess, but I don't know. There's not that much to it, aside from the fact that it's a thin sci-fi parody. And the idea of dragging that on for 4 episodes is, at the very least, based on this, not especially exciting.
Well, we'll see how that unfolds, I suppose. But I want to talk about the movie a bit.
Mm-hmm.
First off, false advertising. The thing dies at the end.
Yeah, the thing that couldn't die dies so easily.
I know. It absolutely could die.
I think the thing that couldn't die, once it's reunited with its body, is on screen for about 2 minutes.
I was shocked at how quickly it died.
I know that sometimes older movies can be a little anticlimactic with their shorter running times, but this is not me going to bat for 3 to 4 hour superhero movies. Please don't. But at the same time, it's you can tell a clean story in 80 minutes, but sometimes that means that the third act gets a little rushed. But this takes the cake. This takes the cake. I've never seen anything like this in my life where, it would have been better if all of a sudden, the thing that couldn't die starts showing real power and is perhaps keen on taking over the world and is going over its master plan and it might continue to possess people, but the head sneezes and comes right off and then it dies.
That could have been good, yes.
Yeah.
I also wonder because, it's a 50s gimmick horror movie, and the idea is that the guy's without his head, right? Which is a special effect that is, they do a pretty good job with it, all things considered. But it would have been easier to just film him as an entire person. So you could have a few scenes of him with the head, but you also have that for the poster, and then you just have most of the movie where he's got a whole body. I don't know. That would have saved some money, surely. And made more sense than this.
That's true. They wouldn't have to hide the actor behind a tree like they do for some scenes here. They just have the head rested there on a branch.
Which is great. I have no problem with any of that. It totally is 50s special effects. You could see exactly how it was done, and it was fine. But the pacing of the movie is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's a shame. And it's funny, we're coming off of The Deadly Mantis, which gave me a bit of hope for how things were going in season 8, because I remember we ended our last kind of go through of the major arcs of season 8 on a high. There was a lot of stumbling in those early episodes, but they seemed to get together for that last one that we looked at, and it's kind of a shame that it's like, oh no, oops, we fell down again.
They forgot their antifreeze this time.
You got to think about it. You got to think about it constantly. Don't forget your antifreeze.
That opening scene, literally the opening scene as the credits are going, that opening scene with, different values of gray, a hill going off into the far off town, people in the mid and the foreground, people walking up to the people in the foreground from the midground. There was so much depth of field in that shot and so much color value balance. It was so pretty after 3 episodes of Coleman Francis drabness that I was just like, well, this is clearly the best movie ever made.
You're that starved for some kind of cinematic ingenuity that the thing that couldn't die ultimately provided.
The opening sequence, and actually all throughout it, it's, the cinematography is perfectly competent to good for what it is.
Yeah, the thing that couldn't die is totally competent.
Yeah, it's not interesting enough, perhaps, but it is competent.
No, it sort of falls, because the promise is that we're going to get the cheesiest movies, the worst cheesy movies ever made. And here we have a movie that's it fills time. It's it's not particularly exciting, but it's not backwards. It's not like you watch it and you go, who made this and why?
So there's not a heck of a lot of information about this movie out there.
No, this is a truly forgotten movie. And having watched it, albeit in the form of a misted treatment, it's real easy to see why. Basically, this is kind of a hacked out effort. It's just whoever's on contract at Universal Studios making the movie. So we have some pretty familiar things in the credits. I think it's the same guy on Gowns as who was on Gowns in, I think it was The Leech Woman, where Crow got very excited that there would be gowns in the movie.
Oh, right, yes.
So that's still there. And I noted one of the credits there was for the makeup and special effects for The Thing That Couldn't Die were credited to Bud Westmore. And that raises the question, did Bud Westmore actually work on this movie?
Did he? I don't know.
Well, that's what I wonder, because Bud Westmore used to be most famous for designing the creature from the Black Lagoon.
Okay.
And so, again, that would put him to a tie to this, except he did not design the creature from the Black Lagoon.
Wait, what?
Yeah, there was an up-and-coming animator and special effects person whose name was Millicent Patrick.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, she's the one who designed the creature from the Black Lagoon.
But she didn't get credit for it in Hollywood?
What are the chances?
Oh, dear.
So, yes, essentially, I mean, he stole her design, passed it off as his own, and she got completely erased until recently. I know there was an article, and I believe a book of the same name, that was called The Lady from the Black Lagoon.
Oh.
That goes into the history of that. So she's finally getting her due, but she never got credit, and she ultimately went out of Hollywood as a result. And so it makes me wonder, who did Bud Westmore take credit from to come up with this extremely crummy creature? Or Is this the best that Bud Westmore could do? And that's why he stole from the likes of Millicent Patrick.
What did you think about the dead head guy makeup?
I mean, it was just a bunch of oatmeal on his face.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it's not that much. It's like, there's some caked on dirt, and that's it.
The thing that I always liked, so of course he can't speak, because unlike Jan in the Pan, this head can't talk.
No.
But he can move his lips and do psychic stuff, I guess.
That I did like.
Yeah, what I liked was how the lips were always sort of, stuck together a bit when he would open them. Mm-hmm. Like he hadn't opened them in 1,000 years, or a few hundred years. But like they were always sort of gummy together. And it was gross in a very, very small way. But I thought it was really nice. It was a nice detail.
Yes, although I think we can credit that to the actor rather than Bud Westmore, I think that was something that probably came up in terms of direction or an actor's suggestion than anything that was makeup-wise.
Well, it has to be. I mean, I can't physically make my lips stick together when I open them up slowly. I'm assuming that's a makeup thing.
I don't know. Maybe he just had some peanut butter.
Maybe.
He was doing one of them talking chimp pictures.
Peanut butter counts as makeup.
The only thing that I know, and again, this could be another case where some work got stolen, but this is a film from 58. And in 1957, that was around the time Mattel asked Bud Westmore to design the makeup for Barbie.
Oh.
Yeah. But I don't know if that's his work. That could be Millicent Patrick all over again.
Very true. Did they ask that other guy to design Barbie's gowns?
Oh, I hope so. That would explain why some editions of Barbie in 1957 had slacks like the Metaluna mutant. And I guess most of the information that I got in terms of what's happening in the movie and the behind the scenes comes from actor William Reynolds, who plays our lead.
Jessica?
Not Jessica, but Jessica's quasi-love interest. The rational guy.
He's the lead?
I guess. I mean, he's the guy who doesn't get possessed.
So the guy who is visiting, who isn't the artist, who's all sassy about her divining skills at the beginning of the film.
Yes, but ultimately is holding the fleur-de-lis with her, and they're having a special moment of quasi-romance.
I guess he does have first billing. He's super not the star of this film.
No, the head is.
The head or Jessica are the star of this film.
And special mention to the divining rod as itself.
And Flavia. Aunt Flavia's fantastic.
And, I like Who's It's What's, who plays the big handyman
guy.
Yeah.
Charles Horvath.
Yes, Charles Horvath is fun. But yes, essentially what it came down to is that he's in this movie because he's contract, and at this point with movie studios, contract players are less and less common. Like, he had been a contract player for Paramount, like he had been in the business for a little while and was seen as leading man material, so he was earning up to like $200 to $250 a week, as opposed to some who are merely earning $70 a week. But even that was being phased out. And in fact, Reynolds sort of blames that for the declining quality of some of these movies that he appeared in, where you did have stronger casts, in his opinion, when you had the contract players, that essentially Universal could cherry pick, or any studio could cherry pick, who is best for this based on their type.
Right.
And of course, because we're seeing the end of the contract players, we're also seeing the end of like the monopoly on like the owned theaters. So Universal movies are no longer playing at Universal theaters, et cetera, et cetera. And now they were making movies with an express concern for what William Reynolds described as the sticks and a sticks release.
Oh.
So he is specifically talking like what we would call drive-in fare and Ma and Pa Kettle movies.
Is this a Ma and Pa Kettle movie?
I think it qualifies as a Francis the Talking Mule movie.
Francis the Talking Mule couldn't keep talking after he was decapitated.
No, but he could move his lips very slowly because, again, they were full of peanut butter. But yeah, like at this point, when he was asked about the thing that couldn't die, in an interview I found, he was talking pretty happily about a movie called Cult of the Cobra, which I haven't seen. But what a title.
Sounds great.
I can only assume it's about Cobra Commando's origins. Where did he get that sexy voice? But as he's talking about the thing that couldn't die, and I quote, the premise was pretty preposterous. My first recollection of Thing is that big, silly-looking talisman that Carolyn Kearney had to wear.
Yep.
And in doing so, he mentions that putting it on her neck put her off balance.
They had to do 50 takes of that scene.
And that the whole thing was grotesque. And, you know, he sympathizes with the audience because he sort of felt that was so ridiculous that their reaction would be, what the hell is that?
That's basically Mike and the Bot's reaction.
Yeah. And with it, he gives a shout out to Robin Hughes, who was apparently a Shakespearean stage actor, and just says, I think he did the best that he could.
He's, of course, playing the headless guy.
Yes. And lastly, talking about the movie in and of itself, you know, he doesn't seem to be too thrilled with the cast because, like I said, he tended to view the contract players as better than when that sort of period was dying out for the studios, though he does give a mention to Charlie Horvath again, saying, I bet I could carry two of them is the line of the movie.
Yes.
But talking about the effects and the ending, because again, the interview is sort of trying to get some sense of what he thinks of the thing that couldn't die. Reynolds offers, even then, I suppose they could have done things production wise that might have been a little bit more real looking. Another thing that I noticed watching the movie recently was that they wrapped up everything very abruptly.
Yes.
Like, the picture was going on at a steady pace, but all of a sudden, from the point where Carolyn put the head on the body to the end, it took about 2 minutes. You could tell it was a case of, okay, let's wrap it up, fellas. Let's get the heck out of here. End quote.
Hey, endings are hard. I don't know if you've ever tried to write an ending, but they're real hard.
That's why you got to write the end first. So as I mentioned, this is a Universal picture.
Yes, everybody loves it.
Yes, that was the slogan for Universal for a long time. Everybody loves it.
Well, what else? Yes, it's from this universe.
And that's why it's Universal and International. But yes, this actually is the beginning of the end, or rather the end for the Universal streak on Mystery Science Theater 3000. The first 5 episodes are all from Universal simply because the Sci-Fi Network owned a bunch of Universal movies at the time.
And had no sense of pacing.
Yes, well, they thought they would be the best fit, probably again, thinking of the movie.
I mean, they're wrong.
Oh, of course, because again, Revenge of the Creature didn't prove to be that great of a riff, nor did necessarily the Leech Woman. So again, why they went this way, I don't know, but they just sort of thought old equals cheesy. But in this case, you just kind of get old, professional, uninteresting B-movie work.
Yeah, but why also do 5 in a row?
Because I don't think that anyone at Sci-Fi saw the KTMA era.
I guess not.
But yeah, this is also going towards the end of Universal's horror cycle, which like goes all the way back to the 1920s with like Lon Chaney Sr. movies.
This is not like that.
No. But that conventional cycle with Dracula, Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, etc., that had already ended by the time we got to the houses of Dracula and Frankenstein, but also when Abbott and Costello decided to meet a bunch of them. That's usually when the horror is over, is when we've entered not just into, it's like, oh, the series is bordering on self-parody. It's like, no, now it's actual self-parody. So Universal was still trying to hold on to those dollars, but save a bit of scratch. So that's where you get these kinds of movies where the elaborate sets of your Draculas and your Frankensteins have been completely abandoned, and the films are set in the modern day, if not necessarily a modern setting in the case of The Creature from the Black Lagoon. What is there to say about the Universal movies that were made in the 50s? The only one that people remember is The Creature from the Black Lagoon. And in fact, when I was doing some research about the end of the original Universal horror cycle, most sources that I was looking at listed The Creature Walks Among Us, the final Creature from the Black Lagoon movie, as like the sad end of the Universal horror cycle. But that was made in 1956, 2 years before The Thing That Couldn't Die. Like, that's how little anybody cared at this point. And I think what it really comes down to as to why like Universal lost the grips of the horror-loving audience, because horror movies certainly never went away, and horror movies have never been unpopular. There's always going to be an audience for horror movies. It's one genre that never goes away from the pictures. It has to do with the fact that tastes were changing.
Sure.
Because when you get to 1958, like this movie comes out, but by contrast, Hammer Studios in England, they've put out their own Dracula the very same year. And they're kind of showing Universal how it's done. They're filmed in vivid color. They have these beautiful sets. And there's a little more sex and gore on display. But again, it's sex and gore for 1958 standards.
And then Psycho comes out, also by Universal.
Yes, and, I think that's probably why they switched gears, is that they saw that their standard B-movie fare was not really working because they kind of abandoned giving these movies the lavish A-movie treatment. And they were just churning out B-movies, one of which proved to be like really successful and really good and really lasting. And that is, of course, The Deadly Mantis. No, it's the creature from the Black Lagoon.
Right.
But with Psycho, you have a smaller, more psychological story, and all of a sudden Universal's like, wait a minute, people aren't going for monsters and vampires anymore. What do we do? And they promptly abandon making horror movies for just about 20 years. I know some come out between that time. That is an oversimplification. But they get out of the horror business that they used to be into. And they let the likes of Hammer take over until Hammer pretty much falls through the same cycle as Universal did, where they lose touch with modern audiences' tastes and just rely on the same old stock stuff that they always do until they fall out of favor.
This list also has one other movie that came out after Psycho from Universal.
Which is?
Dinosaurus! !
Yeah, I'm not familiar with Dinosaurus, I confess. Is Dinosaurus a more forgotten movie than The Thing That Couldn't Die? Keep in mind, The Thing That Couldn't Die came out a year before The Brain That Wouldn't Die, but people remember The Brain That Wouldn't Die.
It's much better.
Yes. I mean, it's got Jan of the Pan, it's got that great "Let Me Die" refrain, and it's all gory and gross.
I'm going to have to look up Dinosaurus! ! Mm-hmm. It looks pretty fun.
Oh, well, who knows? Maybe if MST3K is revived on yet another streaming service, we will get to see Dinosaurus.
Let's ask Trace and Frank to do it.
Ooh, that would be even better.
Hey, everybody, it's time for the Shallow 13.
It's time for the Shallow 13. 13 decapitated facts that we must bury far, far away from today's episode, The Thing That Couldn't Die. Go, Chris, go!
The director of The Thing That Couldn't Die, Will Cowan, had been producing and directing shorts for well over a decade before directing 2 feature-length films in 1958. This one, and a film called The Big Beat, about a guy trying to convince his record executive dad to start signing some of those wild new rock and roll bands.
But The Thing That Couldn't Die would be his last film credit, as Cowan died shortly after the release of this film in 1994? Wait, that was like 30-something years after this film came out. If you have any information on what happened during Will Cowan's lost years, please write into info@itsjustashow, Hopkins, Minnesota 55343.
But yes, our hero, as I keep reminding you, is Jessica. No one else. It's Jessica, and people sure do like to call out her name. Tom often responds with a little tune, culminating in this frantic moment. The instrumental Tom is singing is, of course, Jessica by the Allman Brothers Band. Fun fact, the song wasn't written by any of the brothers Allman, but by their guitarist, named Dickie Betts.
During one of the many, many times we hear someone cry out, "Jessica!" Mike mutters,
"Jessica!"
I thought you were scared to death.
Let's Scare Jessica to Death is the definitive and surprisingly obscure slow burn 70s horror film focused on the mentally ill Jessica of the title. If you enjoy such recent slow burn fare as Hereditary and The Witch, give it a watch. You'll be glad you did.
And as the menfolk open the coffin containing Gideon Drew's headless body, Gideon lends a hand, pushing up the lid from within, and Mike intones,
Horror Incorporated.
Horror Incorporated was a horror movie showcase in the early 70s on KSTP, Channel 5, St. Paul, Minnesota. Its opening credits also featured a hand pushing up a coffin lid and a spooky voice intoning Horror Incorporated. Links in the show notes.
While the treasure chest is being opened, Tom riffs.
Turns out David Copperfield's in there.
Did you know that magician David Copperfield, best known for making the Statue of Liberty disappear, was in a Canadian horror movie alongside Jamie Lee Curtis? For the upcoming episode of Megaphonic's CanCon Horror Podcast, a part of our Scaritage, we look at Terror Train, a slasher film in which the famous illusionist might be the killer.
The fleur-de-lis charm that protects Jessica is found in the roots of a tree where, we're told, trade rats must have placed it. Mike and the bots are confused. Trade rats. They make a bunch of jokes, and I guess the jokes are funny enough, but come on, trade rats, they're a thing. They're also known as pack rats, which is not just a metaphor for my inability to throw away birthday cards, but an actual type of rat that gathers items and stores them in their little rat nests.
And now a Microscorner. Yes, KTEL presents the best of the Universal Music Library, as featured in The Thing That Couldn't Die, featuring such musical numbers as the This Island Earth theme playing during the opening credits, and when evil Jessica uses the divining rod.
I found the This Island Earth music.
Plus, it's got the hit Creature from the Black Lagoon theme when the evil severed head first appears. And so much more! These hits and many more were used on the soundtrack as chosen by Universal's hippest in-house music supervisor, Joseph Gershenson. In stores now!
When the dismembered head is first revealed, Tom jokes,
Bring me the head of Edward Mulhare.
You know Edward Mulhare? He starred in Knight Rider as Devin Miles, the guy who told David Hasselhoff what his mission was going to be each week. Yeah, that guy.
Mulhare also starred in late 60s sitcom The Ghost and Mrs. Muir as the ghost of a 19th century sea captain who haunts Mrs. Muir in her summer cottage in Maine. This show lasted for 50 episodes. Also, it had Charles Nelson Riley, so it's probably the greatest TV show ever made.
When Emperor Hadrian shows up to fight Mike, he says,
Animula vegula blandula, hospice comesque corpus. Whoa!
Y'all got that reference, right? Of course, those are the opening words to a poem that Emperor Hadrian wrote shortly before he died. Animula vagula blandula, hospes comesque corporis, quae nunc abibis in loca, pallidula rigida nudula, nec ut soles dabis iocos.
Which is to say, my charming wayward soul, my body's friend and house guest, now where are you off to? Someplace drab and lifeless, where you'll stop telling jokes. This is, most historians agree, slightly better than Adrian Barbeau's poetry.
Bucking with tradition, the short, out-of-context clips from the movie that play after the end credits, known affectionately by Misties as stingers, have been replaced by shots of the observers. Yep, observers are the stinger now, abandoning a tradition established with Rocket Attack USA in Season 2. This trend would only last for 4 episodes, covering the entire Observer arc, before goofy movie clips resumed their rightful place after the credits.
And that's time!
So in this episode, we get to meet the Observers, and I remember back in the day, the first time I saw the Observers, I thought, this looks like it's a reference to something, and I have no idea what it could be a reference to.
Yeah, I was wondering if that if that caught with you or not. Yeah, the Observers are very much a play on the second season Star Trek episode, The Gamesters of Triskelion.
That's the episode where they all play D&D together?
Yes, it's much better than the follow-up, The Gamergators of Triskelion. No, it's one of the worst episodes of the original series.
Oh, dear.
But the Gamesters of Triskelion, it's totally the Observers. There are 3 multicolored brains who bet quatloos on newcomers in the form of Kirk, Uhura, and Chekhov as they battle a variety of folks, including green-haired women and a big monster man with tusks. And the whole thing is inescapably silly. But the go-between between the providers, who are those are the multicolored brains, is a big bald guy named Galt, who I assume is the John Galt that Ayn Rand was always writing about.
Now, who is John Galt?
The question may never be answered. But I have to ask you, in terms of confusing and confounding host segments, did you know who Finnegan was? Did that ring any bells?
No, absolutely not.
Okay, so Star Trek Corner is far from over, because we have got a reference to the season 1 episode, Shore Leave. So we're backtracking a little bit, and see, there's an episode of OG Trek in which the crew beams down for some much needed shore leave, but it turns out to be a magical planet. I believe Dr. McCoy hooks up with some sexy ladies. Various people see the the rabbit from Alice in Wonderland, which is just a guy in an Easter Bunny costume.
Oh, dear.
And Kirk runs into his old schoolyard chum Finnegan, who constantly wrestles him.
Huh.
So That is the source of the beatings that Mike is receiving. It's just a reference to shore leave.
Is the idea that the observers have confused Mike with Kirk as like the captain of the ship?
Seemingly so, and like who possesses a greater resemblance to William Shatner in his prime than Mike Nelson several years into the show?
Now, which episode of Star Trek was Adrian Barbeau on?
Ooh, I could only wish, but alas, at no point does Adrian Barbeau ever grace the Starship Enterprise.
I mean, she was in a lot of movies that I'm sure you've seen.
That's true. She was in Escape from New York, in which she is alongside, you guessed it, Donald Pleasance.
Amen.
Yeah. But that's not all for like the Star Trek references that we get here. So we've got season 1 covered with Finnegan. We've got season 2 covered with the Gamesters of Triskelion. And now we move all the way up to season 3, in which there is a really bizarre dissolve. It's really distracting during the opening credits.
Okay.
Do you remember like the cast suddenly appears when previously it was just a shot of, a field?
Oh, right.
Yes. And Crow says something along the lines of they've beamed onto the planet OK Corral.
Yes.
Yeah.
I did not get that reference.
That is specifically a reference to the Western episodes.
I mean, I should say, I got that it was a Star Trek reference because of the beaming, but I didn't realize it was about a specific Star Trek reference.
Oh, yeah. There's an episode called Spectre of the Gun, and it's one of the best ones of the 3rd season, which is, I don't know if you've heard, highly uneven. But I think every 60s show had to do a psychedelic Western episode.
I'm thinking The Prisoner here, yeah.
Yeah. The Prisoner had Living in Harmony.
Yeah.
And they use kind of similar things. Like they're both very, very striking. They're both very well directed. And Spectre of the Gun really stands out because you've got Kirk and crew, and they have to reenact the Battle of the OK Corral in this ghost town that is just a set. So you just have these like facades of buildings and a red background for the planet and sand. And that's it. Wow. And it's really compelling. It's like a great visual and a great way to communicate a ghost town to the audience.
Now let me Google this Western episode, The Ghost and Mrs. Muir.
Fingers crossed, fingers crossed, fingers crossed.
There's one called Treasure Hunt. There's an episode called Treasure Hunt.
Is it perhaps pronounced Treasure Hunt?
I can only hope so. Mm-hmm. I haven't watched it. I'll let you know. Listeners, why don't you watch The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, Season 1, Episode 3, Treasure Hunt, and get back to us as to whether it's Treasure Hunt or Treasure Hunt.
That much we'd want to know. And hey, if you've got any great Western episodes that you'd like to write in and tell us about, I want to know. And no, writing in telling us about your favorite episode of Gunsmoke is not going to cut it. We need like a show that has a proper Western episode. So no Adventures of Briscoe County Jr. or anything like that. Try to think of something like Ghost Fight at the OK Corral, in which the real Ghostbusters also have to do the gunfight at the OK Corral in a literal ghost town. So, what we've got here, if I understand correctly, is that this fella who lost his head is really not mad at anyone in particular. He should be mad at Sir Francis Drake, who ordered his decapitation.
Yeah, this is the 3rd episode in a row where we're talking about a movie or short that is tangled up in actual history. So I guess it's time to introduce a new segment. Welcome, friends, to the Historic Corner. Historic Corner.
Ooh, I thought you were going to call it Drake's Cakes.
So yes, what do you know about Sir Francis Drake, who we are told in this movie is the only Englishman in California in 1579, despite there being, another Englishman who's decapitated.
Well, Sir Francis Drake, I mean, I know he's like, well, we're talking Elizabethan era, we're talking like sea captain, explorer.
That's the man.
That's basically it. I mean, I'd recognize his painting because I've seen it before.
He's got a wild tash.
Yeah. And doesn't he have like a full Van Dyke beard, or am I misconnected?
Oh yeah, he's got the whole 9 yards. He's got all sorts of crazy stuff going on in his face in various pointy bits.
Yeah, he's auditioning to play the Master in the next season of Doctor Who.
There's plenty of great portraits of him that you can enjoy. Yeah, he's perhaps most famous for having circumnavigated the world. And indeed, it's on that trip that the events that this movie relates to us are supposed to have happened. Mm-hmm. So yeah, he was an up and comer. He sort of worked his way up the naval ranks until he was able to command his own ships and become more and more important, and then embarked on some important battles for Queen Elizabeth. Maybe banged her? It's hard to say.
Who didn't?
Well, allegedly nobody, but...
Come on, let her have an inner life. Let's be sex positive about Queen Elizabeth.
Oh, exactly. I'm all for it. I'm all for the having the myth of her being the Virgin Queen, but actually her having as much fun as she wanted and needed.
Yeah.
Let's see. What else might you know about Sir Francis Drake? Do you know the name of his ship?
Is that also the Drake's Cake? I really hope so.
No, the ship that he circumnavigated the world in was called the Golden Hind.
And was it named after his golden hinder?
Yeah, a hind is a female red deer, but it's still better to think of it as a big gold butt. Also, before anybody gets too excited about this guy, he sure was a slave trader. You know it.
Oh,
but
boy.
Anyway, that's not what we're going to talk about this time. We're going to talk about the facts behind this movie, because it's based vaguely on a true story or two. So he did land in California, like the movie suggests. He landed in a place which is now called Point Reyes, California. He'd crossed the Atlantic from England, swooped down around South America, come up pretty far north, made it as far as at least Oregon, and then made a bit of landfall, but it wasn't real good. Went back south a bit and landed at Point Reyes and spent a few weeks there trying to fix his ship before crossing over the Pacific and continuing his way around the world. He was there for a while. Apparently he got along okay with the Coast Miwok people there. And he left and didn't establish a colony or anything, but he was just there for a few weeks. Oh, and, he claimed the land as New Albion in the name of England. Specifically, he didn't want to claim any of the lower parts of California that had already been claimed by Spain, because he didn't want to have a fight right then, because his ship was already in bad shape and needed repairs, and just wasn't good timing for that. He'd certainly gotten into fights with Spain in other times and other places, but at this time and place, he's not going to do that. So fine. They're just there for a little bit. But he does leave one person behind. He leaves behind a person who we only know by his initial N, de Morena, who was not English, but he was a ship pilot who was feeling sick and couldn't carry on, and so they left him behind. He stayed there, got better, and walked all the way down to Mexico, checked in with the Spanish authorities, and maybe was the person who gave us this idea. I don't know if you've ever looked at old maps, but maybe you know this about very old maps. There was this idea going around that California might be an island.
Oh, okay. No, that's the first I've heard of it.
Well, you can see old maps where they make it an island for a while there. And it might be this guy's fault. We're not sure. But we get the sense that he walked down and he said, oh, yeah, no, it was an island. Totally an island. I had to cross the ocean somewhere. So that might be him. So somebody was left behind, but he wasn't killed. That was somebody else. That was a guy named Thomas, let's say, Doughty. That's how I'm going to pronounce it. Thomas Doughty, who had been Drake's friend and co-commander. But sometime earlier in the voyage, when they were around Argentina, he accused Thomas Doughty of
treason,
witchcraft, and treason.
Yay!
Yeah, apparently there was a big old storm in the sea. Doughty's ship got separated from Drake's, and he was like, well, that's witchcraft. To be honest, I'm a little confused, and I only did so much research for this podcast, so who knows? At any rate, he decided, yep, this is witchcraft, and I'm going to execute you. Now, that was kind of a bold move on Drake's part to execute somebody, and in fact, many of the other crewmates were like, wait, are you allowed to do that? Like, who are you that you get to execute? And he's like, I'm the captain. And they're like, yeah, you are the captain. I don't know if that gives you the right to execute people. That's not really part of the job description. The idea that being the captain meant that you had absolute power on your ship kind of started with this execution of Thomas Doughty for witchcraft.
Oh, that was a surprise.
Yeah. And when it was decided that he was going to execute Doughty, apparently Doughty requested one final meal with the captain, and they had the meal together and acted like they were best friends, like nothing was going on. They had a very nice meal together, which by all accounts was perfectly friendly and lovely and amicable, and he'd want to be there. And then he executed him.
Wow, Sir Francis Drake, a slave trader known for his politeness.
So yeah, there's an actual sort of witch that this movie is, I guess, vaguely based on.
Oh, wow. So there's some real lore behind the thing that couldn't die, huh?
Yeah, who knew? I certainly wasn't expecting to find that when I walked over to the historic corner. And he was beheaded, I should mention. So that is also, in the movie. But he wasn't buried in California, certainly.
No.
And also, it wasn't until after this beheading that Drake changed the name of his ship to the Golden Hind. Before that, it had been called the Pelican.
Oh, I thought it had been called the Never Headless.
Exactly. But yeah, it's one of those things where, when a company does something really, really bad, and so their response is to change the name of the company. That's basically what happened here.
Chris, I think we've run out of things to say about the thing that couldn't die.
Kind of ran out of things to say a few hours ago, but...
Oh, man. Did we even start this episode?
So Glen or Glenda, real good movie.
Yeah,
real
man.
good riffing of it.
Terrific. See them ads whenever you can. See them early and often.
I kind of want to watch that again now. All right. I have one final factoid about this episode. You might remember early on when they're first revealing that Pearl is hanging out with the observers, that she's got sort of a cooler and a folding chair that she's sitting in, and she pulls up a big hardcover book to read.
Yeah, what's she reading?
Yeah, I mean, I always want to know what people are reading. Always. But especially on TV shows. So what is she reading? Well, I wasn't terribly surprised to eventually, after painstakingly looking at it, to realize that she's reading a Jackie Collins novel. That seems entirely up Pearl's alley. But the one that they picked for her to be reading is, I think, very appropriate for Pearl. It's a book called Lady Boss.
Oh, I see.
Yes. Oh, man. It's from 1990. It is the third in her Sant'Angelo novel series.
Ooh, Sant'Angelo.
Yes. And it was adapted into it. I'm just looking at the wiki here. I don't know anything about this. And I apologize. If you're a big fan of Jackie Collins and want to talk about how great Lady Boss is, I'm super into hearing about it. But until then, it was adapted into a TV miniseries in 1992 starring Kim Delaney in the title role of Lucky Sant'Angelo.
Oh, my favorite Delaney. Take that, Dana Delaney.
And who else is in it? Why, of course, it's Jack Scalia.
Okay, yeah.
He's in some soap operas. Yvette Mimieux. Who has also acted.
Yup, it could be said.
And Joan Rivers.
What? The director of Rabbit Test?
Yep. So, it can't be all bad.
Yeah, I'm sure it's great. It's like, I always love it when Joan Rivers shows up unexpectedly in anything.
Oh, you know who else was in it? Vanity.
Oh, I was hoping you were going to say Charles Nelson Riley.
That would also be good. But Vanity's pretty good. I didn't realize that Vanity was Canadian.
Yeah.
Huh.
She's one of our gets.
Wow. Have you covered anything with her for Scaritage?
Not only is Vanity in the movie that we're doing for Scaritage, she's in the upcoming episode I referenced with David Copperfield.
I wondered about that. Yeah, Terror Train.
Yeah.
All right.
Although we make no mention of Vanity because we had no idea who she was.
She's Vanity. She put out music with Prince.
Well, I'm so vain, I thought the movie was about me.
If you've been affected by the issues on this show, if you want to tell us about your favorite Jackie Collins novel, or if you'd like to ask us anything, get in touch with us. Our website is itsjustashow.com, and we're on Twitter at itisjustashow. We'd love to hear from you. And this show is made possible by listeners just like you. For as little as $1 an episode, you can help us research and record this show, and you can listen to all our superfan bonus bits. Find out more at itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. And if you want to follow up on anything that was mentioned today, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com/episode/75. We've done 75 of these?
Yeah, it's to think this is the little podcast that could. This is the true thing that couldn't die.
Don't say that yet.
What? No podcast has ever been abandoned after 75 episodes.
Well, in order for us not to die, we have to do another episode next time.
Oh boy. Well, we've already done 4 black and white low budget movies. Let's do another one.
Oh, goody.
With season 8, episode 6, The Undead.
It's by Roger Corman.
So that's enough to be exciting.
I mean, it's got to be better. It's got to be interesting. surely.
It's bound to be interesting, I think. We're moving from Universal to AIP.
Do you have anything else to say about this one?
I remember this one being like a decent episode, so that's going to be a huge improvement over what we just watched.
Woo! I am looking forward to that. I mean, I shouldn't say that. We had 3 perfectly good episodes before this one. They were just challenging in other ways.
Yes, but, this one brought our spirits down, Chris.
It sure made me sad about the world.
And you were doing so well.
I know, and everything else has been just sunshine and lollipops lately. All right, well, great. The Undead. We're going to do it next time. Until then...
Quit while you're ahead.
Oh, you made that joke ahead of me. Take it away, Theme Squad.
Let's be sex positive about Queen Elizabeth.